Most clinical approaches to meditation rely on focused attention. The practitioner zeroes in on a single object and forcefully pushes away everything else. This functional connectivity map shows the underlying mechanics of that focus. To lock onto a target, the brain activates the task-positive network in blue, while actively suppressing the default mode network, or DMN, in orange. The DMN is the system responsible for our wandering narrative self. By forcing these networks into strict anti-correlation, the practice splits consciousness. It constructs an artificial wall between the observer and the observed. Non-dual practice dissolves the boundary between observer and environment, rather than weaponizing attention to suppress parts of the brain. In 17th century Japan, the Zen master Bankei Yōtaku recognized the flaw in intense concentration techniques. He argued that forcing the mind into states of rigid focus was a secondary fabrication, a mental construct that actually obscured reality rather than revealing it. Bankei offered a radical alternative, which he called the Unborn, or Fu-shō. His framework abandoned the need to engage in exhausting focal concentration. Treating meditation as an ongoing battle to deactivate the default mode network traps practitioners in a cycle of cognitive friction. They lock themselves into a dualistic loop, fighting their own neural architecture instead of accessing the natural baseline of consciousness. Bankei observed that this unborn state is the innate, unfabricated baseline present in every human being from birth. It doesn't require a specific physical posture or intense mental strain to induce. What we experience as the ego or the self is actually a top-down predictive construction. It is a secondary layer of cognitive processing that constantly interferes with the brain's pre-existing open state. Because this baseline is already running, chasing enlightenment as a future acquisition is neurologically backwards. As Bankei stated to his students, "You are born with a Buddha mind, not something you can gain." Bankei's 17th century phenomenology maps directly onto 21st century neural imaging. By looking at modern data on network integration and gamma synchrony, we can measure exactly what the unborn looks like in the brain. Abiding in the unborn is not the cessation of neural activity. It is the cessation of top-down conceptual construction, allowing the brain to operate as a fully integrated, mirror-like perceptual register. To understand how this works mechanically, we look to Zoran Josipovich's neuroimaging research on non-dual awareness. This scatterplot tracks the default mode network against the task-positive network. Typically, a negative regression line shows when one activates, the other shuts down. But in non-dual awareness, data shifts to the upper right quadrant. Both networks co-activate, processing environment and self simultaneously. While fMRI shows us the spatial location of this network integration, electroencephalography shows us how it behaves over time. A 2016 study by Panda and colleagues tracked these temporal dynamics in expert meditators. This grid displays 13 classical EEG microstates, isolating the default mode network map. Looking at the temporal data, this DMN microstate's duration increases significantly. In healthy controls, it remains stable for 93 milliseconds. In expert meditators, it stretches to 134 milliseconds, and its frequency of occurrence jumps from 3.15 to 4.03 times per second. These precise metrics confirm Bankei's framework. The practice does not shut the default mode network down. Instead, it functionally stabilizes the network and integrates it into active sensory processing. Neurobiologically, abiding in the unborn is the stabilization of this DMN microstate, allowing continuous, unfabricated presence, replacing the exhausting cycle of neural suppression and fatigue. We can also measure the specific frequencies of this stabilized state to see exactly how Bankei's marvelously illuminating mind processes reality. Visualizing the 8 to 12 Hz alpha band, traditional focused attention shows a dense parietal peak, a closed sensory gate. In non-dual states, this peak drops, opening the gates. Broad theta waves emerge frontally, while rapid 25 to 42 Hz gamma synchrony establishes long-range connections across the entire brain. This global gamma integration binds diverse visual, auditory, and somatic streams into a single, unified perceptual field. It processes massive amounts of information simultaneously without requiring a centralized ego bottleneck to sort or judge the data. This maps perfectly to Bankei's assertion that the unborn flawlessly registers the cawing of crows and the rustling of wind at the exact same time. The brain manages infinite data points dynamically without deliberate cognitive effort. How does a practitioner operationalize this high-frequency integration when they get off the cushion and start moving? Bankei rejected the highly regulated practice of kinhin, or walking meditation, where attention is artificially and rigidly locked onto the breath or the mechanical lifting of the feet. His protocol for walking was simply to walk. He used the analogy of a traveler navigating a long journey. The traveler doesn't constantly and obsessively hold the final destination in their working memory at every single step, yet they still navigate the landscape successfully. During unfabricated walking, the brain's innate somatic networks are permitted to manage the physical movement spontaneously. The practitioner intentionally relinquishes focal micromanagement. By dropping the narrow concentration on physical mechanics, the wide-open alpha and theta state can fully register the surrounding environment. True walking meditation is not a rigid exercise in focused concentration. It is a practice of trusting the brain's baseline motor networks to operate flawlessly while maintaining a fluid, non-dual awareness of the world. Bankei expanded this principle to complex, dual-task daily chores. He instructed his students to hoe while speaking and speak while hoeing. When performing manual labor, stopping to formulate a deliberate verbal response forces the brain to aggressively toggle between networks. This instantly re-engages the dualistic split between the default mode and task-positive networks. Subjectively, this network split is exhausting. Bankei described it as turning the unborn into a fighting demon. The high cognitive friction makes the labor feel toilsome, painful, and draining. The correct execution requires letting physical tasks and environmental stimuli register and execute naturally, without giving birth to secondary, reactive, or planning thoughts. Maintaining the unborn during labor means allowing both physical execution and verbal communication to flow simultaneously from the same integrated gamma field, rather than exhaustively alternating between isolated neural networks. Living in the unborn requires recognizing a baseline rather than acquiring a state. This yields 3 actionable rules. First, drop focal restraint. Abandon the micromanagement of physical mechanics and refuse to contract your attention just to suppress mind-wandering. Second, allow unfiltered registration. Let the full visual, auditory, and somatic landscape arise simultaneously, without attempting to gate or filter the data. Third, cease conceptual birth. When intense emotions like anger or distraction arise, do not forcefully attempt to refocus. Simply let the phenomena pass through the spacious perceptual field without identification. The neurobiological reality is true flow states occur the moment we stop forcing the brain to partition itself into an observing subject and observed object. Bankei's Unborn is already fully operational within your biology. It is simply the subjective experience of the brain functioning flawlessly, free from the fabricated interference of the ego.